Hello watch enthusiasts and welcome to Watch Chronicler Unscripted, the podcast available on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes, in addition to any podcast platform of your choice. In today's extra long episode, I have Rick Moray with me. For those who don't know, Rick was the man behind the revival of the Doxa brand in the late 1990s, as well as working to resurrect Aquadive and more recently Aquastar with the stunning Deepstar as seen on the wrists of Jacques Cousteau's divers in the 1960s and 70s. In this episode, we will be talking about how his work brought watch sales to the internet, as well as giving you a behind-the-scenes look at how Aquastar came back under his guidance, and even what he thinks of Doxa's new approach since his departure a couple of years ago. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this podcast on YouTube, this particular episode is purely audio, as quite frankly I couldn't think of any way to improve upon the discussion with photos. Also, this episode was recorded over Skype for rather obvious reasons, so do bear with us on the sound quality front. But with that in mind, put the kettle on or pour yourself a drink, sit back and enjoy a ride through the revival of the vintage dive watch. Hello, it's fantastic to be speaking to you.
Hi, Amran. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
It's great to have you on the podcast. Your watches have changed the way we look at dive watches, certainly in the last couple of decades, from Doxa all the way through now to the new Deepstar. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. It's that these have changed the way we look, particularly at vintage dive watches, something which you're very passionate about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And I think we should probably begin with your development of online sales, which was a very considerable change to the watch industry. And I don't think many people had much confidence in this when you first moved in that direction.
Well, Armand, in order to answer your question, we need to understand why this industry is probably the last of all industries that has joined the internet revolution. Let me start by saying that over the past 100 years, apart from the car, nothing has changed our life so much as the internet. Having an IT background and witnessing the dramatic change, I consider myself blessed. If we talk about phones, for example, I've used dial phones, touch-tone phones, portable phones, cordless, cell, and smartphones. Okay? If you would have told me back in 1980, someday we will all be able to video chat using a device that has no cables attached, you probably would have thought, what the hell is he talking about? Now, well, this is exactly the same reaction I saw on some CEOs' faces of big watch companies back in 1997 when I said, I can create an online strategy for you to market your watches faster than the conventional way. I remember the impressions and the looks in the faces. And nevertheless, I never stopped trying until Doxa has agreed one day, that was like 1999, to create a new collection exclusively for the internet. And that is where the Doxa sub was actually reborn.
Yeah.
So asking me how the industry has changed, it's like the change from the analog dial phone to an iPhone today. You probably would also ask, so what happened after that? And why the lag? This industry has been lagging behind so long, and I've been in it for 20 years. I've been asking myself every day. I've been asking myself why we at Doxa back then did not have any significant competition between 2001 and 2010.
Yeah.
There are two reasons for this. When I joined this industry, a watch brand's success was built upon its retail network. And obviously, online sales would have hurt or upset the retailers. So the industry kept holding back from going online for almost 2 decades until actually, I think 2018, where it was the first time ever that the marketing money spent online in the watch industry exceeded the amount of money spent offline. So that was the first time, and that is where I thought, oh, I'm getting massive competition now. For 20 years, I was like apart from a lot of micro brands, the big players, the major players, just didn't want to go into this arena. There is also another reason which I've gotten to understand later on. Back in the late 90s, it was the time where the watch industry was looking to China.
Yeah.
It was the biggest chance to grow business. And if you look at the numbers, China's annual Swiss watch import in 2000 was 50 million francs. Today, guess where we are? 2 billion.
Cool.
So it has grown 40 times. While if you look at the US market in the same time, in 20 years, it has just doubled.
Yeah.
So this explains why the watch industry was so busy opening a new market to expand while actually ignoring one even bigger market. That's the online market. I didn't know this back then. And so I was lucky, and it was my chance to create a new business model that is not within the focus of the major multi-billion-dollar companies. You cannot compete with those.
No, of course.
And basically, the way we have done it back then was working around how to be able to compete, how to prove how with a good product, how to prove you can achieve something in this market. That is why actually the brands that I worked with and brought back since 2001 had a major success, because there was a lack of competition. I was lucky. There were different markets there which were more important than the market that is the one today. So this basically summarizes the situation back then and the situation today, from major players to micro brands and everything in between.
It's very interesting what you say in relation to the important markets, whether they're online or China, for instance, that the industry has had to pay attention to, because it seems like each year we hear a mix of bad news about the industry being unsuccessful. Certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot about that, and about China no longer being quite the golden promise of enormous sales that people thought it was going to be for a number of political reasons. But it does seem amazing that so much has changed in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And once I've noticed it, I didn't know that. I didn't know that the exports to China were so little back then. It's been growing like crazy because the market has just discovered something called the mechanical watch. And companies were growing. All the companies that were able to establish, or the brands that were able to establish themselves as a player in the Chinese market, have made great steps forward. But a lot of them have focused only on this market. And that is something that everybody is going to tell you in any industry: don't do this. And that is why we have seen a lot of companies in a bad situation.
It always interests me when looking at, for example, the Chinese market, how many Swiss watch brands are completely unknown in the European market, but which are reasonably successful over there.
But are you aware that many of those companies are actually owned by Hong Kong or China-based companies?
I was aware, but I've never been able to figure out, or at least I usually am not able to figure out, or quite gauge how much of an influence there is from their management, or if it's simply ownership or investment.
There is absolutely, because apart from the internet, if you look at the watch business and how it developed, let's say in 60 or 70 years, there are brands like Aquastar who were not very well known as a brand for everyone, because it was very specifically made for divers, except for one market, that was Spain. And in Spain, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was actually making the straps for us. And he said, well, you know what? Aquastar, or called Duards in Spain, it's like the term for a wristwatch.
Wow.
And I was like, really? He said, my mother, my brother, my father, everyone had to have an Aquastar. And the reason for this is there was a very successful company that has marketed the brand so well in the country. And that probably answers your question. So if you know your market and you're present in your market, you're strong, you can obviously achieve a lot more with a brand than somebody else coming from outside. And obviously the internet has changed it. So Google search, content, ranking and stuff has replaced this over the years.
It's interesting to look at the industry from this perspective. I think that a lot of journalism, a lot of general debate about watches doesn't tend to take all of this into account. So it is very interesting to consider the wider picture of how all of this works as an industry.
Yeah, I think we're too busy. We're too busy with features. The whole industry is busy with features. Is busy about features. They forgot, or they tend to forget, or they have forgotten. Maybe there is an awareness coming now among the Swiss and German brands, and also Asian and American brands and British,
Hmm.
that it's the community. It's the community is everything. This is your market.
Hmm.
And I think one of the reasons we were successful and other micro brands who basically took market shares from the big players is that they have realized what the community wants.
Hmm.
And then journalism has started to look into this too. And we're seeing a lot of new collaborations between markets, communities, forums, social media channels and stuff with watch brands. This was not possible like before the internet or 25 years ago.
No, I suppose not. And I suppose it would have been a very different world for brands like Doxa or Aquastar to be reborn into. I think that brings us on to the direction of this podcast, speaking about the revival of Aquastar. But before that, I would just like to briefly address Doxa, because a lot of your period working with watches was during the Doxa time.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a question relating to what you expected to take place. I was just curious whether you thought Doxa was going to go in the direction it did, towards very authentic vintage recreations, or whether you thought they were going to go in a different direction.
Until 2019, it was my dream come true.
Yeah.
It's everything that I wanted, everything that I thought is possible, combining the power of the internet and the community. I use that word because it is really important. I thought there is no stopping Doxa. But also, there is an iconic product. If it's done well, Doxa had all the attributes
Hmm.
to be successful. And remember, in 1999, or let's say 2001, I remember a lot of people, a lot of customers questioning the legitimacy of this brand
Right.
because they were not used to a Swiss watch company basically selling online, while every other Swiss brand, if you go to their website, you will see do not buy our watches online. And they would warn you about gray market, black market, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So the first re-edition ever in 2001, we were trying. It was not clear. Can we actually do something that has already been done before without
Yeah.
any modification? Would that be accepted in the market? Or let's not do any modification and just make a replica 100%. So we basically debated this for so long, and we
Hmm.
came up with that model. And then immediately we realized that this is not what people want. This is not what people were expecting. They are expecting genuine, like re-editions of the stuff that they seen before.
Yeah.
And that is the direction we were going, and it has proven to be successful. And funny enough, a Hollywood movie that was
Hmm.
not so successful, like
Yeah.
Paramount Pictures' Sahara, had a great impact on the
Hmm.
brand recognition. You won't really think so, but it was. But
Hmm.
also after that, all the collaborations with dive watch companies, equipment manufacturers, and stuff,
Yeah.
and made Doxa what it is. And comparing this to 2001 to 1999, where nobody has known the name, and a lot of people, the Clive Cussler fans, used to think that's a
Yeah.
fictional brand. I remember a lot of people saying, "Oh, I didn't know that the orange face Doxa was something that is really existed." So, yeah. And as I always said, the internet is not back then. The internet is not a substitute for I'll call it today, the offline market or the offline world. But the internet back then was able to accept, like to propel you so fast, faster than the classic or the offline way.
extending this question before we address the new revival of Aquastar, which we certainly will get onto. What do you think of Doxa's current collection now that it's moved into a new period of its history?
That's a tough question to ask, but but I've always loved the Doxa sub, and I think it's iconic.
Certainly.
I think it has something that is so unique that is always going to have a place in my heart and a lot of people's hearts. And I think anybody in charge of the brand should be better off continuing the route. I'm not entitled to give my opinion here anymore, but
no, of course.
I think it was very successful the way it was. Where this is going, I might be wrong. So I don't know. I just, the Doxa sub has always meant something to me. It's always going to do.
Well, it's interesting to see you moving in a new direction with Synchron and with the new Deepstar. I think that it's a very exciting watch. I have one on the wrist as we speak, with which I'm timing the interview, so I've certainly been enjoying it. And I'll say it at this point, it is one of my absolute favourites of the year, no doubt about it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks to the inventor, and I'm going to talk about him later on.
Absolutely, and we should. But first, I think we should recap how you came to recreate Aquastar as a brand, because I know that you looked into the brand in the 90s before moving in a different direction. It was only recently that it became possible to breathe a new era into this brand.
You know, from 2000 to 2018, Doxa has taken all of my time, my professional, my personal, my private, and I'm not saying this in regret. I'm saying this because it was a task for life to bring such an icon back and to be able to continue that journey that stopped somewhere in the 80s. I've never lost track of Aquastar. I was always in touch. I knew that their direction was regatta, like sailing and this type of watches that actually Aquastar was also well known for. And because of the owners were deep into sailing and regattas and stuff. So they focused on this, and it's legitimate. So I've fallen in love with dive watches. And before I answer this question, I have to explain that since my early days in the watch industry and as a watch collector, there is something that I've noticed. A dive watch or dive watches are very unique in a way that complex engineering is not only involved in the movement, it's also on the outside, talking about keys, the bezel, the crystal, the pushers, the crown. On a dress watch, they're almost irrelevant. On a dive watch, each and every one of those components were designed to fulfill a certain function. And while Aquastar was the first and stayed the only Swiss watch company that was completely dedicated to manufacturing dive watches, and I myself have also dedicated 20 years of my professional life to diving and dive watches, I think it was a no-brainer. It was like the company that is known for dive watches, me loving dive watches, recognizing the difference between dive watches and every other type of watch, just was like a dream come true for me. And all I want is to bring this brand back to its former glory.
No, well, it's a fantastic reason to bring the brand back. And I think that with Aquastar, there seems to be a marvelous variety of different models. They seem to really try to cater to different aspects of diving as a serious manufacturer of tools. And I think that's something which can rarely be associated with modern dive watches. I think so often modern dive watches are ultimately to appeal to the owner beyond saving their life, which I suppose is the need for a dive watch originally. I can't think of anyone I know or anyone I've heard about who trusts their dive watch solely with no dive computer these days.
Oh, it's actually the other way around. So yeah, you cannot dive without a dive computer. You're not allowed.
Well, sure, yeah.
But I've conducted a lot of polls during the Doxa time through the forum and then later through social media. And I think you can still find this poll on What You Seek, where we were asking how many of you are divers and how many are desk divers. And I think this fall has gone on for almost like 70 years.
Yeah.
And at the end, it was almost like 50%. 50%
Wow.
depth divers and 50% divers. So most of the people who are diving and are into watches, they understand the importance, or they just like to understand the importance of a mechanical device to support or to back up their computer. And the rest, you have like 50% who are into dive watches in general, mechanical stuff, probably also cars and cameras sometimes, who just
Yeah.
appreciate this. We live in a time. I for myself, I have an IT background, and at some point, as far as I remember, to me, when I had issues, let's say coding, you used to
Hmm.
call it programming, I would relax, basically taking a movement, a simple movement, taking it apart
Yeah.
and putting it back together.
Hmm.
And there is one big difference that in the computer world, you could always like delete
Hmm.
and start again and start
Yeah.
over. You could always format your hard disk and
Hmm.
start again. With this type of with a watch, with a mechanical watch, with a mechanical device, you better do it right. And so to me, it was, I think those two words are almost like complementary to each other. This is how I feel about a lot of our customers and audience or watch enthusiasts. It's more than just a timing device. It's, yes, if you're a diver, yes, and you have it as a backup. But other than that, it's more than just checking the time, because we have the time all over the place. We have the time on every screen. We have the time on a computer screen, on a monitor, on a phone, everywhere. We look at I sometimes look at, at my wrist
Yeah.
and keep looking again because I didn't get the time. Because every time I look at my wrist, I look at the watch. I look at the beauty of the watch. I forget.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to check the time. It really happens to me. I'm not, it really happens to me so many times. You look at a watch, you see whatever, and it's like, wow, that looks good.
Well,
So,
we've certainly all been there.
okay, I'm glad. I'm glad
Yeah, no,
not to
that's
frustrate
no
anyone.
uncommon thing to check the time and find that
Okay,
you haven't actually looked.
yeah.
A direction which I think would be interesting to talk about is starting up Aquastar again, and with the history behind it, and with the fantastic story. Really, you could say it's beyond history. It's actually an interesting story.
Yeah.
The creation of the brand and its development through the 60s and onwards into the 70s. But what was your vision for a modern Deepstar? Because I can see why you'd choose the Deepstar as a watch to start the collection with, given that it is probably the most widely recognizable watch they've made, or they made in period, at least to my eye. Certainly the
Okay.
63 was a very recognizable piece, and the Benthos models too. But
The
uh,
Benthos. For
yeah,
20 years, it was always the Benthos. It was more the Benthos, but I wanted something different. It's the only probably one of three watches ever made, the Deep Star, that has a mono compax or like one subdial.
yeah,
I think there is one Dugana and one that is the Deep Star. I've seen a third one and I cannot remember. And that is an approach that has been lost over the past decades.
mm,
You know, people wanted symmetrical designs. So to me, I'm a very design oriented person, and I thought, this is instantly recognizable as a Deep Star. But not only this is not the only reason, but it was just like we've had black watches, we've had silver, we've had blue and green and everything. We've had freehands, we've had bicompacts, tricompacts, and whatever. So it
mm,
was time. It was time for a different approach,
mm,
and I think we were extremely rewarded with the feedback from the community about the Deep
yeah,
Star, about the 2020 Deep Star. Um, Probably why I've chosen the Deep Star, apart from it being the flagship of the brand for so many years.
yeah,
Remember, the Deep Star is the only, or the Deep Star was the first dive chronograph, Swiss dive chronograph, made
yeah,
for that purpose only. It was also the first Swiss dive chronograph where you can operate the pushers underwater. A few weeks ago, I was talking to the inventor of the original Deepstar from 1963, Mr. Mark Jasinski.
Yeah.
That's what he told me, actually. And he said, yeah, there were other dive watches around that like they've been modified to get a chronograph function. But when we approached this, they have actually they filed a patent for the whole watch, not for a functionality on the watch, but for the whole watch as a device. And it was the first capable dive chronograph. Actually, Mark also told me that, the big brands back then, 1963, they didn't dare to take that step to create a chronograph with pushers that are operated underwater. While Frédéric Robert, the owner of the company, didn't care much. He wanted a tool. He wanted to have a tool. He didn't care much about probably what they cared about back then. Oh, there are going to be warranty issues. There are going to be this, there's going to be that. The only thing that he cared about is he wanted to give the divers a device that they can use underwater, and it helps make their life and their work easier while diving. There is something else about the Deepstar too. The Deepstar is until today the only mechanical device that is capable of computing decompression stops of multiple dives.
Yeah, it's a very interesting piece there because I'm amazed no other dive watch, I appreciate avoiding patents, attempted to do a similar sort of thing.
You could have probably, after 10 years, it would have expired and they would have been able to. But I know for sure there is no other mechanical device or mechanical watch, maybe devices, maybe something else, but not a wristwatch. And this functionality has not been replaced until recently, where dive computer with stored algorithms were able to store this type of information, all the tables, and were able to compute multiple dives. So given a very unique design, features like being operable underwater, having this computing capability that no other watch had, additionally a 30-minute counter, all this together just makes it so unique. And obviously there was no way to do anything else but to bring the Deepstar as the first watch, as the first Aquastar in 2020.
It's very understandable. It's a great choice, but I think also it can appeal to so many different people and perhaps introduce them to a different way to look at a dive watch. It's the only dive chronograph I have, for example, and I imagine that a lot of people who buy this sort of watch will be dive enthusiasts or dive watch enthusiasts first, and then be introduced to the idea of having a diving chronograph with that watch, as opposed to coming at it from a chronograph angle. Certainly that seems to be the audience, and I think seems a very interesting product in that regard.
If we just go one step further, what's so special to me, what was always so special to me about the Deepstar, even years before I ever thought I'm going to be responsible for the re-edition of the Deepstar again someday, it was this type of watch where you look at it, you see elegance. So you see this typical 60s elegant chronograph, but it's a sports watch. It's a tool watch. It's toolish from ground up. So it's loaded up with functions. But on the other hand, you can wear it as a dress watch, go out with it. And that was always one of the things that this watch had that the Bensos did not have, that the Doxa studied, that any other hardcore dive watch never had. And that was one of the most fascinating things to me about the Deepstar.
It's very true. It's a unique and uniquely approachable product for a lot of people. But what is your vision for a modern Deepstar in regards to the fact that the watch is now a slightly different size, it's automatic, also with a new colorway as well? And this has been addressed, obviously, in your last podcast. But it would be very interesting to hear your thoughts on this from a technical perspective too, because the movement, I imagine, was very different in terms of dimensions than what you were dealing with in the past.
Okay. Armand, I have to tell you that when I thought about everything that I said before, about how fascinated I was with this watch, not for a moment I spared any thought about the movement. To me, that is because it's a dive watch. Its outside functions mean at least as much as what's inside. So I wanted to see this watch. And there's there's an anecdote about this. You
Yeah,
know that vintage Aquastar Deepstars, they go for 10K and above.
sure.
Not a lot have survived. There are two reasons for this. One of them is the pushers were operable underwater, which was a great feature for divers back then. But did they service the watch accordingly? No. So most of them, most of the dials, most of the movements were shot.
Yeah,
Because at some point, you have a manual wind chronograph with pushers. You basically can operate everything underwater, and it has been used that way. So obviously, not a lot have survived. And those that survived, you know what they were used for? To refurbish Daytonas.
oh yeah, I suppose they did share movements. That's a
Yes,
good point.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. So, and there are actually probably worldwide, you're gonna have probably like 1,000 pieces, not even that close. I can imagine not even 500.
wow.
Now, my main goal was, when we started thinking about the 2020 Deep Star, was to retain that unique design, no matter what. I wanted people to look at the watch. Those who haven't had one, have handled one in person, an older one, they should see the watch and they should know whether this is a new or a vintage one. So I wanted to keep that design. I wanted to keep the proportions. But also, obviously, we can debate manual wind and automatic movements
Cool.
these days. Yes, the enthusiasts, the purists, obviously love manual wound watches movements. But I'm aiming at a broader audience. And I thought, at the end of the day, there is a watch that you like, you buy, you wear, and it's not just to be put aside or be stored as a collectible. I want people to wear their watches.
Yeah,
And obviously, there was no workaround in automatic. Also, the size was, to me, there is a company that has made millions of watches throughout the past 70 years, and they all had the magic 40 millimeter
of
diameter.
course.
So
Yeah,
that's what I wanted. I wanted to appeal to a broader audience, to everyone, not only the diver. And once I've been there, and I thought, okay, it's going to be 40 millimeter in diameter. Yes, the lugs have to be longer because of that design, and the proportions have to be kept. That is where I actually started thinking about the movement. I didn't want to go with an off-the-shelf Valjoux 7753, which is a good movement, no doubt.
sure,
It's a
absolutely.
workhorse, but I just wanted something more special. And all of a sudden, things were coming exactly the right way. We talked to La Jouperet, and we basically have signed a long-term agreement for La Jouperet to be our supplier, our movement supplier for generations, hopefully, of watches to come. It's a combination of both. But to be honest to you, I start with the design, and then everything else has to fit whichever way.
Yeah,
So I have my 40 millimeter. I have my proportions, not but the proportions of the Deep Star kept. And La Jouperet was just the right movement to fit in. The column wheel, I think that is what a lot of people appreciate about not only the outside but on the inside.
yeah. There is something lovely about the idea, or rather the knowledge that behind a closed case back, you know what's going on in there. You know that
Yeah,
your mechanical interests are being indulged, so to speak.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. That is correct. You put it
you know what's
exactly
going.
the way.
I suppose it's a benefit that you're working with Le Jouperet, given the fact that I suppose they're able to accommodate you with regards to how far apart you want the subdials and things like that, because I'm aware that in their catalogue they have different options for
Absolutely.
distances.
It's a pleasure to work with this company.
Yeah,
They are so capable. They are so good in what they do. I've seen quality. I've seen production, manufacturing that is so amazing.
yeah.
And I can tell you right now that we're preparing the next, first Aquastar caliber that is going to be made. That's going to be a collaboration between us and La Jouperet.
Wow. Well, it'll be fantastic to see the future products from Aquastar. And here's an interesting direction which I'd like to talk about with you is, where do you want to take Aquastar in future? Do you want to go down the routes you've previously explored and which have proven to be extremely well received and well appreciated in terms of making remakes of previous models? Or are you going to take it in some new directions and experiment with new products in the spirit of what was originally done?
That's a very good question. Okay. The key to the success that we've had with the former brands was the people, was building a community and involving this community in the evolution of the brand. Obviously, when we started doing this, there was no social media in 2001. There was forum, bulletin boards and stuff. Now it's much easier. Just ask the new and growing, but also the existing community around Aquastar this question. They're probably going to answer it for you. I will do what they want. And that is probably the biggest reason for the success of our brands over the past 20 years.
That's a very, very, very good answer to a rather long question. It seems like a very clear philosophy to follow and has proven very successful in the past. And something I must ask as well is, what are your thoughts? Because I know that there were black dials, there were silver sunburst dials, and also purple dials available on the Deepstar. Do you ever see that coming back?
We can. Well, I could repeat my last answer, but no, I'm going to share you this. Well, why not? Why not? Yes, yeah. I like to have the roots of everything in every product that we newly create. But that doesn't mean a panda dial, for example, a purple dial could be an option. A green dial. That is a departure that I can live with, and that's all right. And I think people like this. And again, they will tell us what to do. But I would rather not to, mess around with a great design like the Deepstars in terms of proportion, sizing of certain parts of it, because it is perfect the way it is. But there are things that can be done, like dial colors, bracelets, straps, and stuff. That is stuff that I'm open for, and I think the enthusiast is also open for it.
Yeah, that's very understandable. And speaking of enthusiasts, and this is a question I have to ask because I've been asked this by a few people. The black dial on the new Deepstar, is it a completely flat black, or does it have a slight sunray effect to it?
All dials that we make have a sunburst like pattern in them. So they're all sunburst, but black is opaque. So much more opaque than blue and gray. That's why you can hardly see it actually. It's a sunburst. Underneath, they're all sunburst, all the same dial pattern. I've been asked that same question so many times as well.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was just me or.
No. A lot of people, because on pictures it's not easy to capture. It's sometimes not even easy to capture the difference between black and gray. So it goes even further. A lot of people tell us, can we see real pictures of the watch? And I was like, well, there are pictures all over. Oh no, those are renders. No, nothing is rendered. Those are pictures. Those are the pictures of those three colors. So this is the thing that the internet cannot compensate, at least today.
That's true. That's a very good point. And as we've been going on, we've been talking for quite some time. As a closing question, and this is just more your opinion and your thoughts, it seems like with all of these watches, the fascination with that period of exploration in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s in the sea with Cousteau, and even in the world of freediving, there is a sense of fascination with this exploration of the sea. Why do you think this is so important with watches? Because it seems like it's become a huge part of the watch appreciation community, you could say, to look back on these wonderful days of sea exploration. Why do you think this is so powerful?
What a great question that is. I've been asking myself and trying to give myself the answers, to give my customers the answer for it. One thing that I always say, in the watch industry, we do not create technology. We only use the technology to retain what has been done before. So with all the materials, the researches about materials, about stuff that is used in manufacturing watches, It's great, but it seems like every possible design has been made. We're celebrating something that was a timing device that is now a piece of jewelry. Now, the association with the 60s and the 70s, one of the reasons is probably that the peak of industrial design was in the 70s.
Yeah.
And starting from the 80s, we had like functions or what you call form follows function, while before that it was only about design. So we love anything from that era, from the 50s, 60s, and the 70s. I can speak for myself in regards of those great times and the people and the great explorers, personalities back then. I grew up reading certain books, watching certain movies, looking at certain types of cars, watches, James Bond, and I'm going to be very honest to you about this. I think
Yeah.
men never grow up. Never. We play with matchboxes when we're 70 years old, and we play with big cars when we're 70.
Yeah.
So there is some mystique about this that makes us all, men in my age, younger and older, to appreciate this. Trust me, I don't know what it is. I would love to know it because I would make the right product to address exactly this, but I don't know. I can only speak for myself. I never grew up. Whatever I played with as a young boy, I'm still playing with something similar, but bigger.
Yeah.
And
No,
more
it's a
expensive,
good point.
or whatever you call it.
It's a good point. I think that it is nice though to have that sort of light-hearted enjoyment of something like watches or cars,
Well, to
and I
see,
think it's nice to admit that we still enjoy these things.
absolutely. I think, remember, we buy gadgets all the time. We
Yeah.
buy the newest iPhone every year because it has new features. Do we use all those features? No.
No.
But we like to have them. So,
It's been fantastic talking. I don't know how long this podcast will be. Of course, the audience will already know, but certainly I don't want to cut anything out of this podcast recording because it's been great fun to record and a really great chat.
thank you so much, Armand. I appreciate it. I like your channel. Keep on doing what you're doing. It's great.
Thank you.
One of the biggest things about the internet, it gives people something that has not been there before.
Yeah.
And whether it's YouTube, social media, whatever, many of us can just strive and excel and grow. And when you're good, there is not going to be a big company or a big whatever major player somewhere who's going to stop you because it's the power of the people. Keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing plenty more watches, which I'm sure we can talk about in future future podcasts or reviews. And by the way, anyone who's listening to this will probably already know that I will most definitely be reviewing the Deepstar in coming days or weeks.
Armand, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for your time. Let's conclude there, but thank you very much for listening. It was an absolute pleasure to record this piece with Rick, and you can count on plenty more interesting guests appearing on this regular podcast in future. For the time being, you can make sure this happens by liking and subscribing on YouTube or by following us on your podcast player of choice. Thank you very much for listening. This is Armon from WatchChronicler.com. Out.